NCDC reports 416 new cases of COVID-19 as Presidential Task Force lifts ban on religious worship.
This is still a fight for life, and our advancement to phase 2 does not mean that COVID-19 has ended.
Edo State Governor meets President Buhari, seeks support for his re-election.
Activities for the conduct of governorship election in Edo State begin with the display of notice of election.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss 5 years of the Buhari administration and the anti-corruption crusade.
The anti-corruption crusade, no doubt, is one of the 3 major cardinal objectives of the Buhari administration. In fact, it formed the campaign agenda upon which the current government came into power.
Now, towards this end, various initiatives and policies have been put in place by the administration to check corrupt practices and strengthen the anti-graft agencies to enable them function more effectively.
These initiatives and policies include Executive Order 6 of 2018, Executive Order 8 of 2019, and the Executive Order 10 recently signed by President Muhammadu Buhari to ensure accountability and transparency at the second tier of government.
Well, Juma, that's not all. Other policies and reforms aimed at fighting corruption are the full implementation of the Treasury Single Account, also known as TSA, the Integrated Payroll and Personal Information System, IPPIS, the Whistleblower Policy, plus the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, NFIU.
Aside from that, Kingsley, Nigeria and 39 other African countries ratified the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption on the continent.
And in view of President Muhammadu Buhari's commitment to fighting corruption on the continent, he has been named the anti-corruption champion.
The president in various fora had demonstrated the strong link between corruption, security and peace, and called on the citizens to own the fight against corruption.
Well, one statement that the president has often repeated is, and I quote, and we all know this, if Nigeria does not kill corruption, corruption will kill Nigeria.
And with this in mind, the anti-corruption agencies intensified their work over the years, which led to the recovery of billions of naira and foreign currencies, as well as landed property stolen by corrupt officials. Now,
apart from that, a number of convictions have also been secured by the anti-graft agencies in the last 5 years. And these convictions include high-profile individuals and corporate entities.
So, as the Buhari administration clocks 5 years, how has the fight against corruption fared? Is this administration winning the war against corruption as expected? What are the challenges militating against anti-corruption crusade of the current administration? What more do we need to strengthen the fight for greater results? This is Good Morning Nigeria, the second for the month, and Dito for the week. I am Juma Yusuf.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Juma and also welcoming you to the program. We are reaching you as always live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. And we're right here in Abuja headquarters studios. And Juma, of course, today, Good Morning Nigeria marks 6 years. It made its debut on the 2nd of June 2014.
And we shall also bring you some of our complimentary segments of the program. But let's join Abdul Malik Adiu for the morning news. Good morning, Abdul Malik, and happy 6-year anniversary on Good Morning Nigeria.
Indeed, quite commendable. Happy 6 years. And good morning, Kingsley and Jumai. Here's the morning news. At about midnight of June 1st, the Nigerian Center for Disease Control has reported 416 new cases of COVID-19 in the country. The breakdown shows that Lagos has 192 cases, Edo 41, Rivers 33, Kaduna 30, Kwara 23, Nasarawa 18, and Borno has 17 new cases, while the Federal Capital Territory records 14 new cases. Others are Oyo 10, Katsina 7, Abia and Delta have 5 cases each, Adamawa and Kanu 4 new cases each, Imo and Ondo has 3 cases each, Benue, Bauchi and Ogun State 2 cases each, while Niger State records 1 new case. On the total, Nigeria has 10,578 cases of COVID-19, out of which 3,122 were discharged, while 299 patients died of the virus. And the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has lifted the ban on religious worship, but sustained the nationwide curfew on the ban of interstate travel as part of new protocols for another phase of ease of the lockdown spanning 4 weeks from 2nd to 29th June 2020. Chairman of the Presidential Task Force and Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, says the gradual ease of the lockdown should not be misconstrued as the end of the pandemic.
This is still a fight for life, and our advancement to phase 2 does not mean that COVID-19 has ended. It is still potent and highly wasteful of human lives. Majority of the confirmed cases are in a handful of local governments in the country. 20 out of the 774 local governments nationwide account for 60% of the cases.
Now, President Muhammadu Buhari has been formally notified of the intention and the desire by the Governor of Edo State, Godwin Obaseki, to seek re-election for a second term under the platform of the All Progressives Congress. This was when the Governor paid him a courtesy visit to solicit his support as the leader of the governing party.
The president was quite warm, was quite welcoming. When I showed him my expression of interest forms, he looked through it and he teased me that he would not have to go through this again, and wished me good luck and assured me of his support.
Now, All Progressives Congress says it will comply with INEC's guidelines on fiscal distancing to conduct direct governorship primary elections in Edo State. This formed part of the resolutions at the end of a meeting between the APC governors and the National Working Committee of the party. The national chairman of the APC, Adams Oshomole, and the chairman of the Progressive Governors, Abubakar Atiku Bagudu, affirmed that the interactions in part of their strategy engagement to boost the inter-party harmony ahead of the governorship primary elections in Edo and Ondo State.
The meeting between the national leadership of our party and members of the Progressive Forum was to discuss issues that have piled up, especially from March 14th, when the forum met and agreed to meet with the National Working Committee under the able chairmanship of Comrade Adams Aliu Oshomole to discuss issues of interest to our party. We have, in the intervening period, many things have happened.
To discuss internal issues of the party, which are basically to explore ways and means of strengthening the party and ensuring that we continue to remain the most favored party.
Now, activities for the conduct of the governorship election in Edo State began yesterday with a display of notice of election at the Independent National Electoral Commission website and the Edo State Office of INEC, while party primaries are to commence today. Independent National Electoral Commission Chairman Professor Mahmood Yakubu disclosed this during an online consultative meeting with political parties' chairman. He advised them to conduct rancor-free primaries and adhere strictly to the deadline for the submission of candidates through online. Political parties were also informed that those conducting indirect primaries are to submit list of their delegates, while those adopting direct primaries to forward a register of the members to enable INEC monitor the process. Now, the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, says without the $5.5 billion external borrowing, implementation of the 2020 revised budget will not be visible. The minister stated this when she appeared before the Senate Committee on Local and Foreign Debt to defend the proposed loans.
From the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, $3.4 billion. This is a facility that has an interest rate of 1% and a tenure of 5 years with a grace period of 3 years.
And that's the morning news. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Jumai after the break.
You're welcome back. The Petroleum Products Pricing and Regulatory Agency has released a new petrol pump price band of 121.50 naira to 123.50 naira per litre for the month of June. Details with Comfort Amadu on Business Desk.
The ex-depot price is now at 102.13 and 104.13 naira, while ex-depot for collection is between 109.78 and 111.78 naira per litre. This development follows a review of the prevailing market fundamentals in the month of May, taking into consideration marketers' realistic operating costs. A statement by the PPPRA advises marketers to operate within the recommended price bands. It could be recalled that following developments in the global oil market, the downstream oil and gas subsector was deregulated, with marketers now free to import petrol. And still on the impact of COVID-19 on the global economy, Nigerian companies, particularly export base, have been advised to take advantage of technology to facilitate their trade.
It's just to upscale, such structure in a way that it can be useful for cross-border trade. That's where the world is going to. So many countries are participating now in e-commerce agreement proposal at the WTO. Nigeria is the only African country currently that is signing up to being disposed to discussing e-commerce. The rest of Africa are not disposed to multilateral negotiation on e-commerce. But it is important to talk about it because that's where the world is going to. We'll be doing more of e-businesses. We'll be doing more of e-trade facilitation than ever before. We must make sure exporters can sit at the comfort of their homes and be able to do business.
And activities on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange maintain positive posture, with investors gaining 25.19 billion naira as NSE All-Share Index inches up by 0.19% to open the market positive. NACO led 27 gainers as against 10 losers, topped by Fitzin at the end of the day's session. With Business News, Comfort Amadu.
Many thanks there for the business package. Next for us is Newspaper Review.
Thank Thank you. And Bayo Achobi is in the studio this morning. Good morning. How is the rains?
Morning. The rains are here now. They're almost coming on every day, and the weather is cooler.
Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning, Kisley.
Yeah, good to see you, Bayo.
Good morning,
Abuja is receiving its own fair share of the rains. Last night it was pretty wet twice, at least in my location. And this morning. Well, that's one point that I don't know. I hope our scientists will also advise their minds to it. What is the effect of temperature, in climatic temperature, that is, on coronavirus itself?
Well, that is an issue that needs to be looked at, because if you look closely, you see that the incidences of high numbers are prevalent in temperate climates.
Absolutely.
And that's something that has to be looked at.
Yes.
All temperate climates around the world is higher. Even when you come to Africa, where the temperature is capable of dropping between 7 to possibly 0 degrees, you see the incidences are higher than the sub-Saharan, which is in very high temperatures.
And the temperature now is dropping.
Yeah, sorry, Joe, but that should be an assignment that they could work on. Institute of Medical Research, I mean, they have, I believe, specimens of the virus. Take it to some of the hottest parts of the country, and also take it to the locations where temperatures are usually milder at this time. In the southern hemisphere, they're already in their winter season, and then you are seeing a spike in some of those parts of the world where temperatures are pretty low. And then even in the temperate part of the world, in some areas where the weather is drier and hotter, say in the U.S., for instance, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, the numbers aren't as alarming as you find in the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, that's the so-called tri-state area.
Well,
all right.
We'll begin the review this morning from the newspaper, Leadership newspaper, and just below the masthead we have FG offers 57 marginal oil fields to indigenous bidders. And more insurgents surrender as troops intensify onslaught. Find those story on page 12 and 6. Reactions trail reopening of worship centers, businesses. With Rider, God has answered our prayers, say Khan, GNI, others. Banks, other financial institutions resume full operations. Federal government retains ban on interstate movement. Orders gradual easing of total lockdown in Kano. Curfew now 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Essential services providers still exempted. Domestic flights resume to June 21st, other countries' fixed dates to begin operations. And the picture story there you're seeing, President Muhammadu Buhari right with Edo State Governor Godwin Obaseki when the governor presented his nomination and expression of interest forms to convey his re-election bid to the president at the presidential villa. And by the side of the picture message, I am ready to reconcile with Oshomole, that's coming from the Edo State Governor Obaseki, presents nomination forms to President Muhammadu Buhari. FG further reduces fuel pump price to 121.50 kobo per litre. You find that story on page 1. I feel is a good, very, very good news for car owners. Again, presidency picks holes in ambiguous claims on PMB's appointments. That story is on page 7. At the bottom plate of the Leadership newspaper, NLC backs autonomy for state judiciary legislature. That story is on page 13. BVN registration increases by 1.2 million in 4 months. That story is on page 19. INEC warns against flouting of guidelines in Edo, Ondo, others. You find that story on page 2. WHO insists on ties with US despite Trump's decision. Find that story on page 2. Kinsley?
All right. Let's take a look also at the front page of the Punch newspaper. Above the nameplate says government receives coaches and locomotives for Lagos Ibadan and Abuja Kaduna Railways. Details on page 21. Market has grown as federal government cuts petrol price to 121 naira 50 kobo. That's per litre. Flights resume June 21st and government orders 50% passenger reduction. That's page 21. I hope as that is being done, they are also cushioning the losses that the airlines will suffer on account of lower passenger load factor. Buhari hosts Obaseki, and APC governors meet Shomole and NWC. That's National Working Committee. Details on page 12. Lead story says, Khan awaits details as federal government opens churches, mosques, and relaxes curfew. Two riders, second phase of ease lockdown begins today, ends June 29th. Final year students may sit for examinations in July. They find suspected kidnappers and armed robbers during their parade at the Adamawa State Police Command in Yola. That was yesterday, Monday. Slain Katsina District Head and APC Chief buried as investigations begin. And Kano Councillor arrested for alleged diversion of palliatives. COVID-19. Bello, that's the governor of Kogi State, declares 2-week lockdown in Kogi local government. Details on page 11. Bayo, you tell us what has happened now. Have they considered now that there's corona? You don't lock down. They're having a festival in the local government. That's why they're having a lockdown.
Well, actually, the lockdown is in Kababunu local government area.
That's right.
And Governor Yahya Bello indicated categorically that Kogi State is COVID-19 free. Nevertheless, because of the reported testing of positive of the Imam of Kaba and one other person, they are going to lock down Kababunu local government area for a period of 14 days. The whole idea is to prove that Kogi is COVID-19 free, but for the benefit of doubt, since there's been an incident, they are locking down the place to intensify on guarding. Talking about...
Good news, just two other headlines very quickly.
Yes.
While we are increasing borrowing, that's according to the federal government, details on page 22. Nasarawa SSG, that is Secretary to State Government, indicted over 1 billion naira scandal and to refund 248 million. One other forgotten story, we haven't seen that on the front pages of the papers. Well, not forgotten really, apparently neglected on account of COVID-19. We said earlier we're entering the rainy season. A story on page 9 of Punch newspaper says there will be heavy flooding this year. And that's according to the federal government. Quoting the Honorable Minister of Water Resources, Engineer Suleiman Adamo, says that some parts of at least 102 local government areas in 28 states fall within the highly probable flood risk areas.
Begin to ask the question, what does NIMET say? Okay.
Well, these early warnings always come annually. And to be forewarned, they say, is to be forearmed. And it is appropriate now for state governments, and if possible, local governments, national emergency management, to begin to get their acts together now, well in advance. They don't have to wait until the flood is here before we start scampering. So this early warning is very, very necessary. And it's critical because we just will be coming out of COVID-19 crisis gradually, and then we'll be facing another challenge of flood. And flood, if badly managed, will come with other pestilence and other ailments again. So we need to be very careful. Meanwhile, President Muhammad Buhari has approved a reduction in the pressures that has accumulated over since March on lockdown. The Presidential Task Force announced that in the next 4 weeks, some measures will be the reopening of worship places. Already, the Christian Association of Nigeria and the Nigeria Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs has welcomed this, and they say that they are calling on government to ensure a decontamination of religious sites. And they are very intrusive about it all. They say that allowing people to return to churches and mosques and pray for victory over COVID-19 will surely give us a victory against COVID-19. Meanwhile,
they said only 20 people in the church or a mosque. So,
well, if the procedure for gathering is that anywhere you are going to have group gathering, they should not be more than 20.
Yes.
But for the worship places, there is a guideline that has been worked together with the Presidential Task Force and the religious bodies to observe social distancing and all those health protocols for purposes of avoiding contamination.
Yeah, but the PTF also says that this will be in conjunction with the protocols established by the various state governments.
Yes.
So it's responsible. The FCT, for instance, that will be the business of the Honorable Minister of the Federal Capital Territory. I recall that some weeks ago, the FCT Minister held meetings with the leaders of various religious organizations. So now perhaps they will have to revise what their last discussion was and then set out the established protocols. Because if people were to mass into places of worship, the whole essence
all
of
the gains we have had
absolutely might be
Yes.
compromised.
But an overview of all the measures that are put in place will be opening of religious places. Nationwide curfew now is from 10 a.m. to 4 a.m. There's also the full reopening of financial institutions. However, the healthy conditions must also prevail. The aviation has to work together now between now and June 21st, after which a date will be set for it to open. And to follow at that time will be also interstate travel. Government offices will operate 75%, and artisans who have been at home for a long time now are now also free to work, but they have to observe all those critical things. So far, the Presidential Task Force indicate that although there is an observation in the increase in the COVID-19 cases, but the observation indicate that there are actually 20 local governments out of the 744 that has most of these cases. And they indicated 3 areas: 11 local governments in Lagos, Abuja Municipal Area Council, and Tarauni local government in Kano. These are the critical areas that are being looked to.
Okay, Bayo, let's now go to... Okay, we thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria today. We're running out of time. We can't
Thank
take
you
the
for having
editorial.
me.
Thank you so much for coming. And we'll be back soon. Welcome back. The war against corruption is one of the major policy thrusts of the Buhari administration. Aisha Uba Ali in this report brings some of the milestones in the anti-corruption crusade in the last 5 years.
On May 29, 2019, President Muhammadu Buhari took another oath of office for a second term after being re-elected in the 2019 presidential election. It's now been over a year of the president's second term in office and 5 years of his administration, which has recorded great strides, particularly in the anti-corruption crusade. However, it has not been without challenges. Before now, corruption had been a major bane to Nigeria's development. However, since making the fight against corruption one of its cardinal objectives, the Buhari administration has recorded appreciable gains so far. The whistleblowing policy introduced by the Federal Ministry of Finance in December 2016 has since yielded several billions of naira in recoveries from tax evaders and public officials. Other initiatives that have aided the anti-corruption fight are the Executive Order 6 of 2018, Executive Order 8 of 2019, and Executive Order 10 recently signed by President Muhammadu Buhari to ensure accountability and transparency at the second tier of government. The Treasury Single Account TSA system that was launched in 2012 but failed to gain traction until the Buhari administration implemented the policy in 2015 has so far resulted in the consolidation of more than 17,000 bank accounts previously spread across deposit money banks in the country and saving an average of 4 billion naira monthly in banking charges. Since its implementation, the TSA, among other benefits, has improved transparency and accountability in the management of all federal government receipts by providing a consolidated view of government cash flow. This is in addition to blocking the leakages and abuses which hitherto characterized public finance management in Nigeria. In spite of great opposition, the Buhari administration introduced and expanded the IPPIS coverage to the armed forces as well as federal universities and other academic institutions. This has helped the country save millions of naira. The Buhari administration ensured the deployment of bank verification system BVN to serve as the verification basis for payment to beneficiaries and vendors in the Anchor Borrowers Program, the Empower Scheme, and the Homegrown School Feeding Program. In 2016, the Federal Ministry of Finance launched the Asset Tracking and Management Project, also known as the ATM Project. This, for the first time, aided government in locating, identifying, assessing, and evaluating all its movable and immovable assets on a real-time basis. In May 2018, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission (EFCC) announced that 603 Nigerians had been convicted of corruption charges since President Buhari took office in 2015. The FCC also announced that for the first time in Nigeria's history, judges and top military officers, including retired service chiefs, were being prosecuted for corruption. Synergy with international crime agencies has resulted in notable gains in the anti-corruption fight, evident in the recovery of the Abuja loot and investigations of fugitives from Nigeria finding refuge in foreign countries. In recognition of its anti-corruption fight, the African Union in May 2018 named President Muhammadu Buhari Africa's first anti-corruption champion. Reports also indicate that the president's anti-corruption fight has so far brought about a considerable level of sanity in the public sector and the fight against corruption. However, recall the popular saying, when you fight corruption, corruption fights back. This implies that the anti-corruption crusade has not been without challenges. Now, how can the Buhari administration further consolidate on the gains made so far in the anti-corruption crusade, and how can the challenges be surmounted? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will be providing answers to these and more shortly.
Thanks, Aisha Bali, for that elaborate backgrounder. But we still have guests with us in the studios to do justice to the subject matter for discussion this morning. First, let's welcome Professor Bolaji Owasonye. He's Chairman, Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC. Prof, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Also here with us in the studio, we'd like to welcome Professor Etanibi Alemika. He's a professor of criminology and member of the Presidential Advisory Committee on Anti-Corruption, PACAC. Prof, delighted to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning.
Okay.
And also in the studio is Professor Abdullahi Shehu from our DG Intergovernmental Action Group. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. And we also have joining us is Dele Oyewale, spokesperson and head media and publicity, EFCC. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
All right. We will, of course, have Dele Oyewale join us in the course of this conversation. Well, it's an all-male cast, as it were, but let's begin the conversation. President Buhari, of course, marked his fifth year anniversary on the 29th of May, and this is part of our series in various segments of the nation, as well as the activities and policies of the administration. Yesterday, our focus was on the judiciary, and on Friday, we did talk about the general disposition of the administration. So today we are on anti-corruption. Let's begin with Professor Owasonye. From a strategic point of view, what has changed in the fight against corruption?
I think that the measures and the approach that has been used by the government since 2015 has made some difference in the fight against corruption. From the background report itself, some of those measures were captured. We talked about strengthening and upscaling the criminal justice process against high-profile people, and this is one of the yardsticks that is used by the international community in measuring performance. That's number one. Number two, hitherto under this, in Nigeria, asset recovery had never been used as an enforcement measure. This government has greatly escalated that, and not only has it done that, as far as Africa is concerned, Nigeria is the only country that has recorded successes in recovering assets that had been taken abroad, because it's an extremely difficult, cumbersome, frustrating process, and it could be also very expensive. But Nigeria has succeeded in the space of 5 years. we have had 3 recoveries. It's unprecedented from foreign jurisdictions. That's number 2. The third measure, of course, is the whistleblower policy. You can't fight corruption without information and intelligence coming in. The government has introduced that measure in order to encourage citizens to provide information. The fourth is a combination of transparency and accountability structures to help the government track and follow money. You talk about the TSA, you talk about escalating the BVN, you talk about the recently launched Open Treasury Portal. These are all measures that are strategically designed at putting openness. As we all know, sin thrives in darkness. Corruption thrives in darkness. Once you throw light on it, you diminish the capacity of corruption to progress. So what the government has been trying to do strategically is putting light by taking measures that will help to put openness into what is going on. The fourth is bringing a lot of people who either to have been involved in illicit financial flows and avoiding taxes, bringing them into the net. One of the executive orders that was signed recently was to say if you have assets outside the country, that's not the issue for now. Pay tax for starters. If it's legitimate, because you may be, the basis of taxation is residency. So if you are living in Nigeria and enjoying all of the services, and you are having income from somewhere and you are not paying anything on those assets, you are violating the law. So again, and it's an anti-corruption measure. Then the fifth, of course, is the role that anti-corruption agencies are playing in terms of not just enforcement measures, but also prevention measures. We talk about the ICPC, EFCC, and other CCB, Code of Conduct Bureau, and all that, escalating asset declaration. So strategically, all agencies who are involved in anti-corruption are much more alive, especially because of the political will and the environment. And the fourth, which I can mention, of course, is the passage of the NFIU legislation last year or 2 years ago, which gave the Financial Intelligence Agency autonomy and strengthened it to be another level of oversight in this whole fight against corruption. So all things considered, I think that the political will has driven a lot of strategic moves to coalesce towards getting the government achieve its objective of fighting corruption. Of course, we're not saying that we are home and dry, but certainly we're not where we used to be.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Bolaji. And Professor Etanivi Alimike, as a criminologist, we'll come to that and going into the mind of people who steal so much money. Can you give us your opening comment on the successes so far recorded by the Buhari administration in the area of assets, getting back money to Nigeria and looking into cases of people who have stolen so much from this country and almost brought the country down to its knees? Let's hear opening comments.
Thank you. I think as the chairman ICPC have said, a number of measures have been put in place. And I think a factor that we can recognize success is consistent messaging. Usually Nigeria have a very short span of attention, whether our government or our individual life. So we start a program, usually it fizzles out. The noise fizzles out in 3 months, in 4 months. But this has been consistent over 5 years. And I think that's one thing that must be said for the administration. There have been consistent messaging on corruption and the evils of corruption. In terms of effort for asset forfeiture, of course, there's this argument, is corruption always bad? And there are those who actually argue, even both from scholarly point of view, and that corruption can actually aid development. And you need to understand the argument they are making. If, for example, the chairman of ICPC has this quantum of money, 100 million, and is a bad investor, and I took the money from him by corrupt means, and I'm a better investor, instead of depleting the 100 million, I'm going to improve the 100 million to 150 million. So the volume of resources within that society has actually expanded through a mechanism of corruption of taking money from the bad investor into that. But that money has to remain within that economy. If it's not within that economy, then it becomes a problem. I'm making this point how the corruption in developing countries, especially in Nigeria, is such a destructive thing compared to the Western corruption. In Western developed society, this tends to be the case where corruption takes from what might call bad investor and gives it to good investor, who then expand the system. And it's the same philosophy that comes here in the way the foreign companies practice corruption here to enrich their own economy. So when you take this, you don't have to sanction those theory, but it does make some sense in the way we suffer. Here, a man steals 1 billion in the morning. By evening, he's on his way to London or Lisbon to take this money out of this country into another economy. I think this is part of the challenge when we're not able to recover assets and still not yet successful in blocking this leakage, this hemorrhage that occur, taking this money outside of our economy. If all the corrupt practices were towards better investment, it will still be bad as a behavior, but it will not be as devastating on the economy as it is today. So in asset recovery, three major ones have been mentioned from the Switzerland, from UK, and then recently from the US. I think the last one was actually very helpful. The Switzerland went through a lot of negotiation as to the chances of relooting and even how it should be monitored. And that generated a lot of discussion. So a lot are coming to Nigeria, but even the freedom in deciding the priority of the utilization is a challenge because of our bad behavior in the past of relooting what has been brought in. I think this government has created some degree compared to the past of confidence of international actors to say, yes, if we give you back this money, we know that a substantial portion of it will actually be used for the purposes for which they are intended. So that's an achievement. So we're not hearing relooting by foreign country that we can't give you back the money. So that's a major asset. Then, of course, you really can't, recover the consequences of looting. If you were supposed to build a hospital 10 years ago and the money was taken out to Britain, it may be recovered today, but thousands of people have died over these 10 years for lack of that hospital. And you can say that of road, you can take that of every infrastructure that from which, in respect of which money had been looted. So it's a good thing that we are recovering, but the best thing is to make sure that the money is not looted in the first instance. And that comes to the question of the preventive strategies of anti-corruption. And I think a lot of that has been done in the last 5 years. Especially, I think, in the last 1.5 years, we must give credit to effort that have been done by ICPC, which signals, for example, that if you take constituency project money, we are going to follow you and see that you didn't just pocket the money or you didn't buy the equipment and put in your house, hoping when you lose election, you use it to establish your own business. So that's one of the very strategic thing that I think is being done. This attempt to make sure that you can't get away with it. And if you can't get away with it, only a mad person will engage in the behavior he or she cannot get away with. So I think these are important things that have been done. There is still an aspect, I think we'll get into it, what I call institutional dysfunction. There are many regulatory agencies which often not recognized as being very important, who are oversight functions that are not effective. Federal Character Commission, for example. Why is it still possible for appointments to be so blatantly, corruptly influenced, yet approval is got for it from the Federal Character Commission? Why is it possible, for example, in a university, a faculty of law or whatever has an admission capacity for 100, that class ends in 250, and JAMB is there, National University Commission is there. I think that's the area we need begin to move away gradually from ICPC, EFCC, and begin to look at a lot of institutions in Nigeria have regulatory function. And I think it's the failure of those agencies that leads to almost sometimes the cynical perspective that nothing is happening.
All right, Professor Lemika, thank you very much there for your opening remarks. Let's bring in Professor Abdullahi Shehu, former DG of GIABA, which is an anti-money laundering agency in West Africa. Professor Shehu, now against the background of the strategic focus of the administration on corruption, in operation, what are the results in your view? Are we winning the fight against corruption, and therefore are you seeing a change in behavior that is often inimical to our economic health?
Well, thank you very much. Since this program is organized within the framework of the 5th anniversary of the administration, we'll congratulate President Buhari and the APC government. Well, first, let us begin from the purpose of fighting corruption. Why do we fight corruption? We fight corruption because we want to establish or re-establish rule of law and to provide a good welfare to the people. So this is where it is important to start from. Where then do we have to start in the assessment of the progress or otherwise being made? There are 3 areas. Let us look at the target setting. What were the targets that were set by the government to achieve? Then look at an assessment of the challenges and constraints. Then we look at an assessment of the impact and management of expectations. These are the 3 main pillars by which we can assess progress or otherwise. Now, for this administration, I think we can adjust our narrative to focus on specific area of assessment, which is the National Anti-Corruption Strategy that was adopted by this government in 2017. This should be the parameters upon which we can assess progress. And there are 5 key pillars in that strategy. The first one is prevention. And in prevention, we should look at the number of legislation, the quality of legislation, and as the chairman ICPC mentioned, the passage of the NFIU Act was an important landmark development in the anti-corruption fight in Nigeria. But beyond that, what has happened in 5 years? Okay, what about pending amendments that should have been made? Now, in assessing this area, we don't look at only the executive. The executive has a role. Other arms of government also have their own roles to play. It seems that we have a National Assembly that is not proactive, is only waiting for bills to be presented to them by the executive. They should be very proactive and look at where they can intervene and improve the quality of actions. We look at also the judiciary, what is happening there. There are developments, positive developments, especially with regard to enforcement of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act. But there are also some downsides of it with recent judgment by the Supreme Court making that act almost either a weakened act or so. The second pillar for assessing administration progress is in the area of enforcement. Yes, we have had a number of cases going to court, investigation. We commend enforcement agencies for what they are doing because fighting corruption is not an easy task. But beyond that, we need to assess the impact of their actions on the economy and on society. The third area has to do with the public education strategic partnership with civil society. I think this is an area that has gained a lot of support in recent times in Nigeria. We have seen civil society being very active in demanding for accountability. But have they been getting what they demand? They have had challenges in getting information from government offices. They ask for information based on the Freedom of Information Act, and yet they have difficulty doing that. So I think there is still a lot to be done in that area. The fourth pillar of that strategy is in the area of asset recovery. I think we must commend Nigeria for the breakthrough in this area, which no other country has achieved much. But the point is, what is the impact of this on the ordinary citizen of this country? You have recovered asset. What has happened? We are still hearing people, government going to take loans. We are also hearing a lot of complaints that government has no money to undertake projects. If you are fighting corruption, you should fight corruption to help you to improve the welfare of the citizens. But when you are fighting corruption and you are still complaining as if nothing has happened, then there is need to reflect and assess the impact and also manage the expectations that people have for the government to do what it's supposed to do. Final plank of the strategy is international cooperation. Yes, as Professor Alameka said, the management of the three major recoveries has reinforced confidence of the international community. This is good. What more can we do in that area? Do we see our system improving? If so, in what areas? Where are the leakages? What can we do to improve, to make it better? What is the perception of Nigeria in the international community? In recent, the last TI report that was released, the reactions from Nigerian authorities were not palatable because they felt the report was not fair to Nigeria. Well, if it was not fair to Nigeria, let our own institution establish a clear desiderator for assessing progress based on impact. Fighting corruption, yes, you cannot see, but you can measure. If you say, yes, you have convicted people, yes, of course you have convicted people. What is the impact of that? If you have recovered assets, what is the impact? Has it reduced the expenditure? Has it increased revenue for government now to embark on social welfare scheme? I think, in general, these are the parameters of the narratives that we need to formulate in order to promote a very constructive dialogue in this forum. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Abdullahi Shehu, thank you for your opening comment. We'll now go to Dele Oyewale, spokesperson, head media and publicity, EFCC, with about a record 1,271 convictions between May 29, 2019 and May 28, 2020. The chairman of the EFCC, Ibrahim Wagu, said the EFCC will stop at nothing to get its work done, and you are on course. Looking at you, the Nigerian perspective, people say the EFCC is a toothless bulldog. But what has changed the narrative now with so much convictions across Nigeria and also including people from other countries?
Thank you very much. I think I want to start by commending the government of President Muhammad Buhari. The political will of the government in terms of allowing anti-corruption agencies to function without any interference, and the consistency in pursuing most of the policy measures that the government has rolled out. There are some of the incentives, there are some of the strengths that the government has built for the anti-corruption agencies. Be that as it may, the Economic and Financial Crime Commission, we all know that it is no longer business as usual. It is one thing for the government to have very good political will. It is another thing for laws, extant laws, relevant laws, to be enforced. The enforcement of laws, has yielded very important dividends in the anti-corruption fight, especially with the Economic and Financial Crime Commission. For example, in the last 1 year, the Commission has secured 1,279 convictions, meaning that 1,279 fraudsters have been sent to jail. And this means that the laws that are put in place, they are working. Beyond that, in the last 5 years, I want to quickly say this, the Economic and Financial Crime Commission alone has recovered assets in excess of 828 billion. And this goes to suggest that the laws that are in place, they are being enforced. They are being enforced effectively. They are being enforced without any let or hindrance, and they are yielding dividends. We need to look at the anti-corruption fight in the context of the dividends, in the context of the results that we are getting. Yes, we may talk about institutional reforms, we may talk about policies that are put in place, we may talk about a lot of things that have been put in place, but the question is, what are the results? What results are we getting? Yes, there are results. Number one, there is public consciousness today about the need to shun all acts of corruption. I want to tell you that our experience in the Economic and Financial Crime Commission has shown that an average Nigerian today knows that it is no longer business as usual. Just February this year, through the instrumentality and the novel idea of what my executive chairman put in place concerning engagement of youth in the anti-corruption fight, we had what we called the first ever Nigerian Youth Walk Against Corruption, February 14, 2020. And through this program, youth across the country were mobilized in a road walk, the first ever in Nigeria, in a road walk across all the states of the Federation, including the Federal Capital Territory, to make a statement about the need for youth and even the elderly ones to shun acts of corruption. So the results that we are getting, they are self-evident. And it goes to suggest that all the laws that are put in place, all the measures, they are working. If within 1 year we could secure a conviction of 1,279 in 1 year, and there are so many things that are even achieved within the context of that 1 year, it means that the laws are working. Beyond that, the public ownership of the war against corruption is more important. And the Economic and Financial Crime Commission is achieving very, very impressive results in this regard. We are making the whole nation to know that if we are suffering as a result of corruption, we must all come together to fight it. So everybody is being mobilized. Just about 2 weeks ago, my chairman had a meeting, a town hall meeting, a virtual town hall meeting that is organized in London to mobilize diasporans, Nigeria in the diaspora, to join the fight against corruption. And he made a statement that was very, very instructive, that wherever we are as Nigerian, in any part of the country, we have to identify with the anti-corruption agency, and we have to contribute our own quota to ensuring that people that have been identified to be corrupt in our midst, they are not allowed to continue the way they are. So, in the context of building consciousness, in the context of enforcement of laws and the results that we are getting, in the context of public ownership of the fight against corruption, to ensure that the whole nation is sensitized, the whole nation is conscientized, and the whole nation is mobilized in the fight against corruption, we can see that we are moving forward.
Thank you very much, Dele Oyewale. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's come back to the studios here. Professor Owasunye, chairman of ICPC. Let's take a look at this. I mean, the critical success factors have been highlighted in what we have seen in 5 years, and some of the points also articulated by the other guests, Professor Etanibi Elemika and Professor Shehu, have touched on some aspects relating to challenges. But perhaps we can fast forward a bit and then return again to some of the nagging issues. I just want to find out from you, are we, from your experience, are we gaining sufficient traction to assert at some point that going forward there can be no rollback of the gains that we are talking about now. ICPC was established by an act of National Assembly year 2000, that's 20 years ago. It wasn't established by Buhari's administration. EFCC wasn't established by Buhari's administration. But it's taken quite some while, to begin to gain traction. But in gaining traction, what do you see? Are we likely to have a relapse into the old ways of saying, look, well, after all, it's a Nigerian thing?
Okay. Before I address that issue, I'd like to pick on a few things that came out of the conversation. The first is about the perception and the TI report. A few months before the TI report came out, maybe 2 months, there was the MBS and UNODC report that came out, which wasn't a perception survey. It was actual survey that interviewed over 30,000 Nigerians on their views and personal experiences about corruption. And the result was that corruption, bribery, for example, had gone down. Not radically. That was just about a month or so before the TI perception survey. So perception can be stronger than reality, but we need to put things in context, because my colleague said that we should get our agencies to go out there. What are we looking for in terms of facts and statistics? This is very important to underscore. Regrettably, of course, it wasn't well pushed in the media and the narrative about this important shift of a reduction. That's the personal experiences of people engaging with government, with police, you name it, and all that. That's number one. Number two, about the narrative with regards to all the recoveries and yet so much borrowing. I think we need to tie things together. First of all, just as Professor Alemika has said, and Professor Shehu also agreed, with regard to asset recovery, this government has changed completely the narrative. And the returns are tied specifically to social welfare issues. The Abacha load that was recovered from Switzerland is being used for the conditional cash transfer. In the history of Nigeria, when was the time that ever that the poorest of the poor have this sort of social welfare given? We've got to put things in context. So monies that are being recovered are being put into things that hadn't ever been done before. That's important. The third point with regards to also working with civil society who ask for information and they don't get it, they do get the information. What I've found in my personal experience is that sometimes when what people expect is not what they get, they just mute. They make a lot of noise. Oh, this is what is going on. And then you say, okay, these are the facts. There's no more noise. They don't take time to correct, to say, oh, we were wrong. This is not the situation as it is. It's very instructive to put that in context. The fourth thing about rollback. Political will is extremely vital in the fight against corruption, in spite of statutory measures. And that we must commend the Buhari administration for, the high-level political will that has brought things this far. Accompanying that are a number of structures that hopefully, and I say this, hopefully will prevent a rollback. Professor Shehu has rightly spoken about the anti-corruption strategy, which is not a legislation. It must be reviewed from time to time. The third point is that the truth of the matter is that you cannot fight corruption by enforcement. It never succeeds. Enforcement is expensive, it's cumbersome, it draws time, a lot of time, So you have to take preventive measures. Now, a number of things that this government is introducing, I do not expect, for example, a future government to reverse the TSA, because that future government will need revenue that were being diverted. So we don't expect a future government to ignore the effect and the harmonization and the increase in the number of people brought within the tax net, financial inclusion through BVN, because we need to know who we are. In any event, the times that we're in, COVID-19, has shown quite a lot of possibilities and things that need to be done in terms of making sure we don't reverse back. So that's the second thing. The third point is about public and citizen ownership. Before I get to that, the prevention measures are critical. And these are some of the very key things that ICPC is focused on. Because we've evaluated how much we can do and get, as Professor Alemika rightly said, the opportunity cost of corruption is immeasurable. Okay? The people who would have died from the hospital that wasn't built 10 years ago, or the students who've been radicalized into terrorism, kidnapping, because the school was not built, how do you reverse that? It's almost impossible. Livelihoods are completely destroyed almost permanently. So, if you are able to prevent, okay, which, interestingly, is actually the preferred model of the international community. If you look at the UNCAC, the prevention strategies and options are almost 60% of the entire framework. So it's important that we look into prevention measures. And that takes me to what Professor Alemika said about using regulatory measures. At ICPC, for example, when I resumed, we found out that if you are investigating public servants who have done something wrong, public service rules, even before court settles anything, gives provisions to interdict. But some people went to jail and came back to work, as if nothing happened. The first thing that we did was to aggregate all that and we sent it to government. And government acted on all those issues very quietly. So this is a very important prevention measure. People know that something will happen. And if you want to go to court and drag the case for 10 years, that's up to you. In 10 years, you are out of work. You are not earning money. So you will have to make up your mind. Because that's what happens. People drag and stretch the case. In 10 years, the corrupt system enables them to also move up in the political ladder and so on and so forth. So we've introduced that measure. The second thing, of course, is, like has been mentioned, using the constituency project, the constituency and executive project that we're doing. We don't want you to steal 10 billion and start pursuing you. We want to track from the minute what you are supposed to do and whether you are doing. And that very pressure alone, with COVID-19, as soon as funds started coming in, we issued an advisory which was made public. It restrained action. And then we followed it up by setting up a monitoring team. And then we followed it up by providing guidelines and all that. It restrained spending, and the Accountant General's Office has since come out with further framework. These are prevention measures. Now, some people are reckless. They will still do what they are not supposed to do. But we will be able to track. We have eyes, and just last week we had a conversation with civil society and media on COVID-19 with the Office of Accountant General about monitoring the funds. These are new measures. Now, will all of this prevent a rollback? Perhaps not entirely. The commitment of the people, that takes me to the people's ownership. The commitment of the people is critical. If people will not own any anti-corruption measure, it will not be sustained. The people must understand that it is not a government issue. It is not for the government. Whoever is in government is a board of transit. You are just in motion. You will be out of it. But the people will forever remain. And we can see it with the vulnerability of and the weakness in our health system now during COVID-19. If people who know that projects, contracts have been awarded, build this hospital, do this, do that, and they were never done, will we be where we are today? Of course not. So we've got to understand that. So going forward, I would say that the strongest thing that we should look forward to is people ownership. People ownership is critical. And we, anti-corruption agencies, even the government itself, I think Professor Alemika mentioned about sustaining the campaign and that position that we are focused on corruption. That itself has raised the level of consciousness of society. Not only that, it has created a lot of anti-corruption warriors in the past 5 years. Whether for real or for fiction, they are there. There is no day that you open your newspaper or the media that somebody is not saying something and looking. So the level of consciousness is far higher. And then, of course, we are finding people are breaking their silence Those who never used to say anything before are talking. Okay? People are talking. And so this is very important in my view in sustain. So in terms of the legal framework, I think we have the kind of legal framework that we have. My final point in terms of where this has put Nigeria, the three recoveries that the country has been able to do, the appointment of President Buhari as AU anti-corruption champion, and recently this year, Nigeria sponsored a policy through the AU, which was adopted by heads of government in February. ICPC were very central to this, the Common African Position on Asset Recovery. Basically saying, if you are going to recover an asset, based on our own experience, if you don't have these structures, you can't move forward. And if you are going to sustain it, you must introduce these measures. In 5 years, the government has been able to, from its own insistence and experience, say, if you want to recover one dime from abroad, including what you are going to use the asset for people. Even though there are arguments around the sovereignty question, why should you be telling me what I use? But if you want to make it seamless, raise that argument, but also for the accountability within your own country. Because your citizens also want to know what the money will be used for. You need to introduce those structures. And the government has passed in that regard. All the returns, they've been specific, and they are being monitored not just by international community, but also by civil society and the media within our country. These are measures, I think, that going forward should help to stabilize things.
Professor Boliji, thank you. You've raised some pertinent questions in the fight against corruption. Professor Abdullahi Shehu, do we need to strategize or come up with new policies to strengthen the fight for better results?
Well, let me start from where he stopped. You see, it's not that we don't appreciate what government is doing. We appreciate, we commend it, but that does not mean that we should not say there is still more to be done. I think it is a little bit immodest to say that the recoveries made under the present administration has been more than what previous governments did in the past. Quantitatively, qualitatively is incorrect. Other governments did their efforts and the statistics are there, and we need to appreciate what they have done and encourage this government to even do more. Secondly, I'm happy also the chairman of the ICPC made reference to the MBS survey, the second corruption survey in Nigeria. Indeed, yes, it shows slight improvement in the petty corruption in Nigeria. But it brought out a critical and fundamental issue that has occupied the minds of Nigerians today, which is the issue of nepotism as an aspect of corruption. Corruption is not only when you steal money. Nepotism is an important element of corruption, and it says that nepotism is an issue of concern, and it is existing, and we need to address it. This is very, very important. The impact of nepotism is, you see, with respect to stealing money, if people steal money in an economy that is buoyant like Nigeria, people don't even feel the impact, because the oil money will keep on coming and some people will be siphoning, but the economy has the redundancy to absorb the shocks. But with nepotism, you kill the institutions that are supposed to even fight corruption. So this is an area that we need to focus on. With respect to strategy, yes, we need to strategize. We need to focus on aspects of making progress. As Kingsley started with saying, yes, ICPC was established, EFCC was established. We need now to see, okay, are there legal hindrances to the fight against corruption? How can we address those hindrances by legislative enactment? How many pieces of legislation have been enacted so far in the past 5 years? This is what we should assess. Secondly, how many institutions have been created? And here I'm not saying that institutions must be created when there is no need for them, but how have we strengthened the existing ones? Are the institutions performing better than they were before? We have seen that it took the administration almost 4 years to get effective leadership in the anti-corruption agencies. So if it was a priority, something should have been done immediately. But thank God it has been done, and our own for the civil society is to support the government to do the right things. But when we say that, look, we have not made significant progress in this area, that does not mean that we don't appreciate the government in that area. It's only to encourage and motivate the government to do more in what we expect the government to do.
All right, Professor Shehu, thank you very much. Let's invite Professor Alemika one more time. Professor Alemika, well, this is an issue that relates to perception. One of the major anti-corruption posters of the Buhari administration had to do with seeking to defeat grand corruption, as it labeled it. And grand corruption obviously will also involve the so-called high-profile cases. It would appear, as I said, it's a matter of perception, that lately we haven't been seeing a good number of high-profile cases being charged. Is that indicative of saying that the big crooks are now getting more restrained? Or does it indicate that, fine, the fight against grand corruption has been won? And if so, we come back to the point that you raised earlier about the institutional dysfunction. What then are we doing about petty corruption, the aggregate of which is also injurious to our economic health as a nation?
Thank you. We start with perception. I'm a little bit, and this is something that is maybe an irony. I'm not terribly, I do a lot of perception research, but I'm not a terrible fan of perception studies. Because the methodological underlying survey, people who interpret it don't understand the limitation of survey, which is a big challenge. Again, I think there is a problem we've had in this country in relating to reports of agencies, whether local or international. I think this, and I'm just being honest, I think there is undue emphasis on TI's report. And this, unfortunately, is the fault of government. When it is favorable, government uses it and says, see our scorecard. When it is bad, then they, of course, they go and mourn. If you know the methodology of TI, if you are an investor, you will not buy the product, or you will not use your investment decision on the basis of the methodology of TI. And I say this as somebody who has a lot of training methodology. They bring about 11 different databases with different methodologies, and you aggregate that, and you spice that with a small proportion of perception of international business person. They have their value, but I think Nigerian government tend to overrate it. You have the UNODC survey 2016-2019, very good survey. This is a critique I've made in many international organizations, especially with UNODC. I have a lot of links with UNODC, especially outside of this country. UN agency has this sickness. They lack magical numbers. Magical numbers, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000. These are estimations. In drugs, he knows in drugs, and I've had it with my colleagues in Vienna. This magical, it's not just UNODC, WHO, and the rest of it. And I have taken notice of this during HIV. I was in South Africa, Southern Africa, during HIV. By those estimations, there will be nobody living in East Africa and Southern Africa today. They will all have been wiped out. So there is this magical number. So we must be very careful as a country.
How do they come to these numbers? How do they come to
It's a statistical modeling. So if, for example, you take a Nigeria, 1,000 from Nigeria. For example, if you are doing a purely statistical analysis, a survey of 4,000 will be representative of Nigeria. You don't need 1 million. Will be representative. Why you need 30,000, 40,000 is when you are doing analysis region by region and level by level, you need a large number to be able to do that. But if you're just doing a national level of analysis, a sample of 4,000 or 5,000 will be enough statistically accurate to depict. So when you now go there and say 10% of that 4,000 said this, and they constitute 10%. So what is 10% of Nigeria population? That is 20 million. You then move from that and say 20 million Nigeria says. This is where the problem is from moving from one level to another. That is a problem. But it's not, let's not waste our time. It's an issue. So I think the government needs its own. Then coming to what money had been used for.
Sure. My question actually had to do with grand corruption.
Yeah, grand corruption.
Grand corruption.
Yes. Kingsley, I don't know when your recent time means. And I'm a little sad to say this, because it's not a pleasant person for people to have served their country, and then suddenly, at the tail end of them, you pick them out for their faults. So I'm saying this with it's still innocent. When last was Oyo Ita case went to court? It's recent. That was the head of service. So I think we can find other examples. So I'm not sure it is. What happened at the beginning of this government was that there was this avalanche of untreated matter over almost 10 years that were waiting. So, that were waiting. And, the government just harvested it and threw them back to the pool for prosecution. That's why you find all the generals, all the ex-governors, and it's a harvest, that was already there in the basket that was just thrown out into the judicial system.
Harvest of the big crooks.
Yes, that were there before. So in this case, of course, it will take a number of time, a change of regime, for you to have that kind of harvest again. So, but I'm not sure that there is actually a lack of it. The volume has declined, and then it's because the water in the pod also have declined, because you are already treating those ones that are there. So I don't think that is the case. I think another issue that has been raised here is with respect to the use of the fund. Now there is a budget line that relates to recovery, where you think you are going to fund this project. I think in some years, 500 billion have been estimated. So there is actually an anticipatory recovery that is now part of our budget, and there is a line for it. And then some other programs that are there. I must admit that there is a challenge of strategic communication of the government itself. And that is why, because I think a lot of agencies that are relevant are still put outside of anti-corruption agencies. Take National Orientation Agency, for example. Because corruption had been normalized in this country, you need a constant messaging that goes beyond propaganda and reach out to explaining to people you are not a beneficiary of corruption, you are indeed a victim, and you'll be victim consequently. But I think many Nigerians believe that, my time will come. I dare not block that opportunity for corruption, because when it's my time, I won't have. When it is time for my person, I won't have that opportunity. I think that communication between the people and the government is necessary, and there is need to bring out information sector of government to do a more vigorous, relationship with the people, letting them know the consequences of corruption. I think that's one of the things that I think still need to be done.
All right, Professor Olemika and gentlemen, we're going to have to take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation, plus taking the tweets that have come from our viewers. All right, welcome back at the stage. Good morning, Nigeria, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Let's bring in again Mr. Dele Oyewale, who is head of media and publicity of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Mr. Oyewale, I'd like you to also respond to the issue on the table in the sense of, against the background of the many convictions that you have had. There would appear, as Professor Olemika has indicated, to be a gradual exhaustion of the so-called grand corruption cases. But what is being done with respect to petty corruption, which some would say remains rather pervasive and in aggregate terms also has a lot of injuries to the financial health of the country?
So much, sir. The truth of the matter is that at the Economic and Financial Crime Commission, we are very strong in combating both grand and petty corruption. Today, at different levels of our court, we have so many high-profile cases, that have been charged to court. High-profile people in the judiciary, in the military, former political office holders that have been alleged with one act of corruption or the other. We are in court against them. And every day, we always have one issue or the other in the area of either arresting, prosecuting, or trying people for high-profile offenses. Now, in terms of petty corruption, we know what the Economic and Financial Crime Commission is doing with the so-called Yahoo boys. Today, the menace of advanced fee fraud is reducing. It is reducing because of the intensity and the vibrancy of the operation of the EFCC. I think we are familiar with a recent arrest that was made about a very high, I would call him high-profile advanced free fraudster, that duped his victims about $240,000 US. Many such cases, the EFCC is tackling them. But what is important, and I quickly want to respond to this, the ICPC chairman, in one of his submissions, he said that you cannot fight corruption by enforcement. I think I take very serious exception to that. Because both enforcement and prevention must be combined together. The level of impunity of our people today in Nigeria demands that we combine enforcement with prevention. Because if you are preaching and preaching and preaching and there is no fruit of your preaching, the preaching, might be in vain. So if you go to people, you say, don't do this, don't do that, and you are not enforcing the law, it might be a barren exercise. So both enforcement and prevention must be combined together. It is the aggregate combination of the two that will produce the result that will move the nation forward. So at the EFCC, we are enforcing and we are preventing both grand corruption and petty corruption, and there are fruits, there are results to show. So it is important that we get some of these issues very right. Because those of us that are on the field, we know that when you go to schools, you form integrity clubs, you engage civil society organizations, you engage so many, you even market women groups and all of these groups for preventive measures. It is also important that when people are doing the wrong thing, you enforce the law. That is what is going to even make the preventive measure to have more bite. So at the EFCC, grand corruption, petty corruption, we are tackling them and we are combining prevention with enforcement to achieve results that can be seen, results that are feasible, results that is open to the entire nation.
Thank you so much. Professor Bolaji, he was talking and you were trying to say something.
Because it was quoting me out of context.
Okay, can you respond to that?
What I said is that you cannot fight corruption by enforcement alone. So if I use the word alone, it means that you need a combination of other things, which includes public education and citizen buy-in. And I made that point very emphatically. What people accept will thrive in their community. If people stand against corruption today and say, I will not give bribe, no matter what you do, I won't give it, that alone will diminish corruption from happening. So he's quoting me out of context clearly. What I said is that prevention, as they say, is better than cure. And I use the word that enforcement is very expensive. It takes a lot of time and all that. And where you have weak structures and systems, it escalates impunity. So you have to combine. So I never suggested that enforcement is not required. ICPC has a lot of enforcement cases, including high-profile ones. We may not make as much noise in the media as they do, but we do have. So the point to be made, and that should be said in context, is that a combination of factors is what will help. Don't forget that when you have systemic corruption, and it is very bad, what happens is that it undermines the capacity of the institutions to even perform. So what you need, both the prosecution, the defense, the judiciary, the investigator, everybody is compromised. It's like cancer that has become malignant. Okay, so you've got to use a combination of measures. Okay, in developed countries today, in recognition of some of the challenges faced with the enforcement, that is not to say they've dumped enforcement. I never said we dumped enforcement. They use what they call non-trial prosecutions for corporate malfeasance. Okay, that is big. That means we will not take you to court, but the penalty that you will pay, okay, will be as if we have taken you to court. Second point is that systems that have been weakened by corruption, one of the things you need to restabilize them is revenue. So you could send the message, and it's important to send the message by punishment. But if it does not get you the revenue that you need to govern, it doesn't stabilize the government. It does not stabilize the government. So you've got to have a combination of approaches to deal with the issue in order for you to achieve your objective.
But Professor, I know you are itching to say something, but I want to bring in this aspect because 5 years ago, scholars and practitioners were all praising the enactment of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act. Because part of the reason why, as Professor Lemika said, that you had a basket of grand corruption cases which the Buhari administration harvested was that you had a lot of delays. You have adjournments and cases starting afresh, de novo, as it is said in law. But here we are. Recently, the Supreme Court struck down a critical provision of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, by which a judge who is trying the matter said the Federal High Court gets promoted upstairs. That judge, under the Administration of Criminal Justice Act provision, could, of course, step down to conclude the case and then move on. Supreme Court now says, against the background of various provisions in the Constitution, that provision is a nullity. Is this likely to compromise the fight against corruption, where, where cases can drag on again for so many years? Prof?
Absolutely. I think that, and a lot of people have made this comment, I think it focused on the technical angle of it. If you want to be really technical and theoretical about it, the Supreme Court was right, that once you have moved to another court, you are no longer a judge of the court that was handling the case. But here we have a statute that gave the power and the permission. So with the benefit of hindsight, you do not know what are the weak provisions of a legislation until you begin to apply it. So basically, perhaps what the law should have said is that the judges who are elevated will be allowed to finish cases that they are doing, and those should be fast-tracked so that they can start enjoying the fruits of their elevation to another court. Or you amend the Constitution, which is a much more cumbersome process, to allow that in situations where active legislation has made this allowance, it will be allowed to stand. Clearly, there were other angles, in my view, that the Supreme Court did not look at. First of all, you had a situation whereby one of the parties who was convicted had said, I prefer this. Didn't see injustice in the fact that the judge had been elevated and wanted to the trial to continue on that judge. Secondly, the case, and more importantly, in my view, the case had gone on for over 10 years. Over 10 years. And it was because the case had gone, we can argue, over 10 years, that one of the defendants preferred to see a closure to this case by saying, look, even though this judge has been elevated, which means we are going to start all over again, then we have another 10 years. So this is 20 years of my life defending this matter. I want to put closure to it. And I think that the Supreme Court could have taken that into account, because there are many, even though happily a lot of the evidence is documentary, is within financial institutions and all that. So you could get officers from those institutions to come and tender, but not all cases will be on all fours with that. In some other very important cases that are of public interest, the witnesses are no longer available. And our criminal justice system says hearsay is not allowed. It is the people who were involved who must come to court. So in terms of the effect, it is clearly devastating. Now, the next question is, do we have the capacity to quickly redress the big gap that this throws into the criminal justice system? That's a big question, because it's either you do constitutional amendment, which goes around the states with a lot of the politics, and given the dysfunctional nature of the system, you are not sure how quickly that is going to happen. So that is a big dilemma for us, because apparently from that judgment, it appears that the only way out is a constitutional amendment.
Professor Alemika.
Thank you. I'll go to my point I want to make about prevention and enforcement debate by simply starting with Bolaji left. And that is the point Professor Shehu made earlier. One of the challenges in Nigeria is the concept of government. I think people equate the executive arms with the government, rather than simply being an organ of government. Yeah, he made that point very clearly. What is the role of the judiciary? What's the role of the legislature? The executive is not responsible for the conduct of the legislature. It's not responsible for the conduct of the judiciary. The main function of the executive is to enforce the law. And it ends with prosecution, bringing a case before the court. And of course, it needs to be able to enforce the law where the law is available. I think this understanding is still not. So you find the legislative senator come down and say, this government has not done anything about corruption. He doesn't know he's indicting himself, because it's part of government. This idea needs to, I think that also informs judiciary, where you think you're not looking at the national interest. In the 60s in the US, one of the things that gave the symbolic freedom to the blacks were actually what was then known in the US parlance as judicial activism. That actually started from the 1930s in the history of America, but became very prominent in the 60s, where the Constitution was interpreted in a way that you understood the context in which that. So a judiciary that understood the importance of anti-corruption would not reach that judgment. And so I think it does say, it says something about the role of judiciary in understanding the consequences of corruption in the stability, development, and security of this country. Now coming to prevention, it's a light joke. Those of us in law enforcement, we know you don't get a medal for prevention, unfortunately. You don't get a medal for prevention. How many crimes have police prevented in Nigeria? Nobody knows. How many corruption cases have been prevented by ICPC and EFCC? Nobody knows. So that's the problem with prevention. That prevention may work, but you may never get credit for it. And that is why law enforcement agencies will always want to tilt in respect of the measurable enforcement angle. But I think what society needs to do is to do what, again, in criminology we call about target hardening. Target hardening. I can see a rock here. So if I want to do it, it's almost impossible for me to do it. And I think that's the most effective prevention method, to have structures, processes that made it difficult for me to do it. But like I said at the beginning, the problem is even when you have the institution, you have the processes, there are problems. I think Shehu mentioned nepotism. I've mentioned that repeatedly. I say nepotism is a very, and even in this studio, there is a major problem because it weakens institution and, of course, undermines even the norms and rules of the game. And that's why I mentioned the federal character. It's an important institution that has not served this country. Because if it has, we will not have legislators' list, which is an area we're not looking at about corruption. You can't get a job today without people telling you there's a legislators' list. My students, former students, in the past, they will say, oh, NTA is hiring. Do you know, Kingsley, And I will say, oh, I know him. Today they will say, do I know a legislator? Because Kingsley, even within the institution, is no longer relevant.
Are you sure, Prof?
I won't give you my. I won't give you my. If we are looking for you, I won't give you my candidate because I know it will fall through.
That's right. A very serious point you are making.
Yes, and I think these are the areas now we need really to focus on. What are the regulatory? And I'm within the university, and I see. We talk about standard. How could you have standard when a department has a carrying capacity of 60, but at the end is having 250 students? The department itself actually admitted 60 students. In the office of the vice chancellor, 190 had been added, and there is no. And JAMB issues admission letter to all of them. Why can't they say no? We can't issue 250 letters of admission because your carrying capacity is 60.
All right, Professor Lemika, thank you very much. I mean, you've raised a very significant point. I do hope that going forward, we might be able to consider influence peddling, as an aspect of corruption. We indicated earlier that there were tweets from our viewers. We'll quickly go through them now. Innocent Yawa James, this administration, that's the Buhari administration, has made the fight against corruption its cardinal turning point for a greater Nigeria. So far, so good. It's a laudable achievement. But so many MDAs and individuals still need to be x-rayed so that you have in mind that corruption is no longer business as usual.
And Mike Anyoko tweets, kudos to the regime for fighting corruption in governance and recovering looted funds, but they should do more in this regard. Those in government accused of corruption should be investigated and if found liable should squarely face the music.
Dele Jack Solomon, the slow pace of court cases and financial settlements made by corrupt, wealthy individuals and entities outside of the courtroom impeded successful prosecution of those who had looted the national treasury. Nigeria also lacks data on physical and financial assets that have been recovered in or outside the country. Is that exactly correct? Sufficient data, I would imagine. All right. Therefore, President Muhammadu Buhari needs to make good his pledge to implement internationally endorsed guidelines for the accountable management of returned assets.
And Akeju Olagunju tweets, the administration has done very well in areas of anti-corruption and no doubt our approach is like slashing the wild grass to prevent it from growing. It needs to be uprooted as societal ill. One of the ways to do it is to promote the word ethics across the board. Although President Buhari's anti-corruption campaign has been impressive so far, it is no cause for complacency as citizens' perception of corruption among public officers remain high. Most Nigerians think more public officials are corrupt and need to be indicted.
All right, Comrade Ungala, our president is a hero in terms of fighting corruption on the continent and the world at large. Government should try and use the monies and assets recovered to construct roads, invest in education, agriculture, and the health sector.
First is Akiboyewa. Corruption has reduced greatly since PMB came to power, but there is need to make the fight against corruption consistent, transparent, and accountable. Also, Nigerians must own the fight against corruption for it to succeed.
Okay, Nandom, we have corruption is a seed that was planted way back, which is now eating up the country like a cancer, because we turned a blind eye to it. Now, if we're to fight it successfully, then we all must be of one mind and one voice.
And Law Alpha C tweets, this government has, to its credit, sincere commitment in fighting corruption in all areas to the extent that it's no longer business as usual, whereby high-profile public officers have been prosecuted and jailed, much to the chagrin of many.
Edo Ayok, it says, while President Muhammadu Buhari is working hard to reduce corruption at the federal level, there is need to check on corruption at the state level.
Jones Ferrari tweets, Buhari's administration is the best I have seen in the history of democracy. He has demonstrated true leadership quality and set Nigeria on the path of growth. And by 2023, we shall make more achievements. Long live Buhari, long live Nigeria.
Ibrahim Bello tweets, more still needs to be done to spare nobody as sacred cows. The fight should be all-inclusive.
And Ms. Yobe at gmail.com tweets, fighting against corruption by this government has made enormous impact on the development of Nigeria within these 5 years. Kudos to Buhari.
All right, so those are the tweets that we can immediately accommodate for now. Professor Abdullah Ishewu, let me get your closing thoughts on this. I know that it's a fairly elastic question, but you can paraphrase your response. You talked about public ownership, and indeed the other guests have also emphasized on the need for public ownership of the fight against corruption. But then how do we balance that challenge of public ownership of the fight against corruption versus what is, shall we say, often improperly couched cultural disposition towards corruption? I mean, people say that it's your turn, our brother is there now, so we'll always come back to you. So there's that cultural challenge, there's societal pressure, and yet you are asking people to own the fight against corruption.
Well, that is just going around the hall. Let me make 3 points. The first, with respect to the debate on combining the prevention and enforcement aspect, I support that. I support the EFCC's position on that. But I even want to go further on that. Situational crime prevention in criminology has to take perspective as to what are the opportunities created for such a crime to occur. And therefore, in the context of Nigeria, I think that the enforcement should take precedence, because those jurisdictions we are referring to is not that they are less corrupt than Nigerians. They are equally corrupt. But because of the deterrence they have seen in respecting the law, everybody respects the law. And therefore, we need to send a credible deterrence by fixing the nail where it hits most, particularly by targeting the highest risk and making the maximum impact, as was the case during New Horibadu in the EFCC. The second point I like to make has to do with the delay in high-profile cases in court. I think the challenge we would like to put to our enforcement agencies is to collaborate with the National Judicial Council. There is a committee, monitoring committee in the National Judicial Council. HEDA, a civil society organization, has compiled 100 high-profile cases. Let there be a study together with the civil society, monitoring of cases. Each case, for example, that somebody cited the case of one politically exposed person. When was the case charged to court? How many times has it been adjourned? At whose instance was the adjournment? So if we aggregate this, we will be able to know where the problem is, and we can deal with it so that we can put this issue of blaming either judiciary or law enforcement on this matter, we can put it behind us once and for all. Finally, what do we need to do? Are we still on time? Finally,
very briefly now. You have eaten through your time.
We need to entrench accountability. Accountability at all levels, including at the state and local government level. People are elected into offices, they do what they want, and they get away with it. There is no accountability. Who is to enforce accountability? The Auditor General of the Federation, for example, will present an audit report. Nothing will happen about it. So we need to look at that so that we can improve governance, because the essence of fighting corruption is to ensure that there is rule of law.
Okay, Professor Abdullah Ishewu, former DG Intergovernmental Action Group, thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. I would also like to thank Professor Etanibi Alemeka, Professor of Criminology and member, Presidential Advisory Committee on Anti-Corruption, PACAC. Thank you so much for coming. Professor Bolaji Owa Sanoe, Chairman, Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC. I hope I didn't mother your name there.
I know I'm the one.
Okay. We also like to thank Dele Oyewale.
She's wishing you sonship.
Yes. Dele Oyewale, spokesperson, head media and publicity, EFCC. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. And It's a wrap today. Thank you so much. I am
just before we sign off, there's a story you have on Majek.
Yes,
Fashek.
I do actually. I thought the time was running. We have a breaking news. Popular Nigerian music legend Majek Fashek, popularly called Majek Fashek, is dead. His death was confirmed by his manager Omenka Ozoma on the late singer's official Instagram handle. The reggae maestro was best known for his 1988 album Prisoner of Conscience, which includes the multiple award-winning single Send Down the Rain, the song that earned him the stage name The Rainmaker. Majek Fashek has worked with various artists worldwide, with Tracy Chapman, Jimmy Cliff, Michael Jackson, Snoop Dogg and Beyonce. We hope he rests in peace.
All right, rest in peace, Majek Fashek. It's rainy season, send down the rain. That does it for us today on Good Morning Nigeria. We're back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, stay safe and be well. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Juma Yusuf.